was found by a local herdsboy one Tuesday morning. The body belonged to Robert Oko, Kenya's Minister of Foreign Affairs. He had been shot once in the head. His right ankle was broken in 2 places. His body doused with diesel and set on fire. News of Oko's grisly death spread rapidly. It's become one of those unsolved murder stories that are tightly woven into Kenya's history. All these years later, there are still serious misunderstandings about the circumstances of Dr. Oko's death. At the foot of ALILA, near Robert Oko's Koru farm, there's a line of trees. It's an unfinished memorial that's supposed to mark the spot where the minister's body was found. It's in the wrong place. Even the date of death on Oko's grave is incorrect. Who killed Robert Oko and why has to date remained a mystery. You might think you know this story, but what follows is going to surprise you.
There were lots and lots of issues which I should be investigating, which I couldn't do. So I wanted to take it further and complete my investigation to a satisfactory result.
No policeman, either true nor other policeman from UK, ever approached me.
She told me, young man, the things you have in the book The Night Bob Died are mostly fiction. The gentlemen who may have murdered my husband are not the ones you say murdered him.
I never had any row with him. I never had any quarrel with him. We never quarreled with him at all.
If I was asked to speculate, my speculation would be that perhaps the molasses issue was peripheral to the motives for the killing of Dr. Robert Oko.
Robert lived quite near here, and he was a good friend. We didn't socialize a lot, but whenever I saw Robert, we had a chat, and what I liked about him was so informal. He'd walk in here at breakfast time and be having breakfast, and he'd sit and have a cup of coffee. So I've come to borrow a paintbrush, or I've come to ask you to lend me your plumber. I've got a water leak in the house, that sort of thing. And he was a really nice chap.
He was a quintessential scholar in my estimation. I learned a lot from him, and many of us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did learn a lot from him.
He had a lot of wealth of experience in diplomacy, even at the time he became a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
By 1990, the world was changing rapidly. With the collapse of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, the global divide between communist East and capitalist West finally broke down. 3 months later, Nelson Mandela was released from 27 years in prison as South Africa's apartheid regime began to crumble. From the late 1980s, Kenyans themselves had been agitating for multi-party democracy.
For me, 1988 is a key turning point in Kenyan history. That's when Moi and KANU rigged the one-party elections. That's when we see the beginnings of mass opposition, a really effective multi-party movement. That's when we also see Moi really clamping down. And that's when the donors come in and say, hang on a minute, we can't be giving money to a guy who's willing to commit those kind of atrocities in order to stay in power. And that's the point, I think, that the tide really starts to turn.
That is when now there was a wind of change. That is when we started getting a sympathetic hearing. And of course, by sheer coincidence, then we had people like Smith Hemstone, who was the American ambassador to Nairobi, right-wing Republican, but very, very decisive and speaking in very forcefully. Now that the Cold War, the United States government was interested all of a sudden in promoting human rights.
But President Moi could at least rely on the eloquent Dr. Robert Oko to defend the KANU government against the call for change.
If that is inheritance,
then I have to learn a little more English.
One of the best advocates for the Moi regime was Dr. Uko. And he had just come back from, I think, Norway, where he had performed very well in making the best of a bad situation, defending this government about the torture that was going on.
Yesterday there was an article in the press in Norway which says, according to Amnesty International, there are still in detention 50 political detainees. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen of the press, that in simple language is called a lie.
In January 1990, President Moi and a delegation of 83 ministers and civil servants flew to Washington to attend a prayer breakfast hosted by President George Bush. They returned 8 days later on the afternoon of Sunday, 4th of February. That evening, Dr. Uko visited the home of Hezekiah Oyugi, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. What they discussed is not known for certain. At 9 the next morning, Uko went to see President Moi at State House in Nairobi. At 5 that afternoon, Uko left for Kisumu with his driver and bodyguard in his official Mercedes. His wife Christabel remained at their Loresha home in Nairobi. Dr. Uko was due to fly on an official visit to the Gambia on the night of 14th February. He told his wife that they would drive from Koru to Nairobi 2 days before. But at the last moment, Uko changed his plans. He told his wife that he would take the evening flight from Kisumu and that she should travel by car as planned, which she did at about 3 p.m. on Monday 12th. She was never to see her husband alive again. Here is where Robert Uko spent his final hours. It's his farmhouse in Koru near Muhoroni. At around 8:30 on the evening of February 12th, he received 4 guests, including his sister, Dorothy Randiak. It was an historic night. They watched television coverage of Nelson Mandela's release from prison.
Chieng' Uko lal, esechete ne wan kode ei dala kanyo. Ma ochopo saa 2:30 mar otieno, wuode gine chifu ng'ane Peter Kasuku gotieno gor gi Derepe gi Agnes manyamino Uko Dorothy nikech iluongo Dorothy na Randiak ne dhi nyime.
At about 10 p.m., as the guests were leaving, Dorothy Randiak noticed that the outside door to Uko's study was open, so she instructed Selina to lock it. Between about 11 p.m. and 2 in the morning, according to staff testimony, Dr. Uko asked for the keys to the 2 pedestrian gates leading to the farm. This was odd, as he had keys to both. Later,